Let's get straight to the point with views from both sides of the aisle. We now welcome back Austin Barber and Brandon Jones to our MPB studios. Austin is a Republican strategist and founder of the Clearwater Group. Brandon is an attorney and former Democratic member of the Mississippi House of Representatives. Welcome back to At Issue, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to be here.
All right, so we're going to give Medicaid expansion a little bit of a breather here. We're going to talk about the things that have not made it. This was a deadline week, a big deadline week for bills being reported out of committee that originated in the opposite chamber. But this is kind of one of those days where, like, you know, if something doesn't get out, it's for all intents and purposes dead. And there was a couple things on that list. Early voting. Senator Jeremy England had an early voting bill. The House killed that. The Senate killed the House's felony suffrage bill. The House's plan to revamp PERS seems to be dead. A bill that would take over Jackson water system appears to be dead. So we've talked a lot about a lot of these issues coming into this. So I'm just going to kind of punt this to y'all first, and I'm going to start with you, Austin. Which of these issues, either does it surprise you to see dead, or do you think might actually still have some legs? Because there are always other ways to get these issues back on the calendar.
I love how you say Jeremy. Your Louisiana roots really come out true when you said Jeremy. I say Jeremy. You said it in some way that I can't.
And the people in Hurley call him Jeremy. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah. So Senator England, if you're here,
Senator
multiple pronunciations of your first name on At Issue. And now I don't even remember what you asked me. I think this is what surprises me.
This is why we can't get anything done over there.
Well, what do you think someone might have legs to pop up? Because we know even though something is
that's
dead,
supposed to be dead.
Yeah.
I mean, look, PERS is not going to be dead until it's dead. That is such a pivotal issue. It always is, but it really is this session. It's gotten a lot of press, a lot of debate, a lot of conversation. I think that is the issue that will never go away until the session is until they sign die, and then it could come back for a special session. I'm not predicting that, but there's just so many things involved with that. That's my big issue that you mentioned that could come back.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to, toot my own horn here, but you may recall a couple weeks ago I predicted that a lot of these bills are going to have a hard time.
I
mean, look, and you could see
to
this.
To your credit, you did. You
said
there's a lot. There's a lot.
Well, you could see this coming too, and there are some bills that are really easy to pass. Economic incentives for some company. I don't know if we've ever in the history of the state, when the governor calls everybody in, blocked one of those.
But those are big deals.
They are, but they're not. You don't have a team of folks over there lining up again.
That's right.
They typically pass. By the way, we've passed some bad ones. I mean, looking back, I'm sure there are some folks who wish they could change their vote. But nonetheless, those are kind of easy things. They're a series of easy things. Passing a resolution to name a sidewalk after somebody you care about. But these issues that we've brought up here, these are huge fundamental issues. Like when you're talking about, changing the makeup of the board for the retirement system, which makes recommendations to the legislature, which they could ultimately then use to change, benefits. That's a big deal. Ballot initiative has something that's been bounced around since the Supreme Court's ruling.
And it's on your list should be on your list. I don't think
that's
you said
also
it,
one of the things that died.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Well, no, it's fine. But I mean, that's another example of like it's a popular issue. It's been polled all over the state. It's been polled by a variety of different groups. But if you're going to do big things, they take a different type of level of engagement and a different expertise, Austin, I think. So I kind of look at this and say, this legislature as a whole has not shown a lot of aptitude at doing very difficult things. And I think it comes down to communication breakdowns. And we've seen that in almost every one of these issues. If I was trying to draw a line, like what is the commonality among the things that died? It's either you did not engage the major constituency group which was involved, which in PERS case, by the way, is 350,000 retirees, or you didn't talk to members of your chamber to let them know what your proposal was going to be. And you sure as heck, in many of these cases, did not talk to the other chamber. I mean, the House is not talking to the Senate, Senate's not talking to the House, and that's where a lot of this stuff dies.
But Brandon, on PERS, this issue has been debated since, when the Democrats controlled the legislature in 1999 and passed hey, we're going to give you a cost of living adjustment assessment, the COLA, the 13th check.
The 13th check.
And they passed that, allowing retirees to get that. But they didn't include a way to pay for it. This issue has been debated for 25 plus years. So I don't think it's fair to say, well, they didn't talk to the right constituency groups about man, they've been talking to them for years and years. And let me finish this real quick, please, sir. I hear what you're saying. You're like, I think what you'd want to see is let's have more open groups and meetings in May and June and July and August where we're, the plans are on the table, people are coming in, we're fully vetting them. A lot of that stuff happened, but I think on PERS, this has been a known issue for a long time that we're going to have to do something. I do not think that issue is dead this session. I just believe, I'm not saying anything's going to happen, but I just believe it won't go away because both sides, I'm sure, ultimately want to do something. They know something's got to be done on this. And I think there's still time to get that done because the rules can be suspended with a two-thirds vote, and you can bring up new things. Sorry, I wanted to make that point.
Well, I think we probably don't want to get too deep in the weeds on some of these policy issues because we've done some of that. But I think it's important to remember with respect to PERS, this is a bit of a shell game because let's be clear about what the PERS bill does.
What's a bit of a shell game?
The whole conversation that's taking place because what the bill would do would change the makeup of a board.
The House bill.
That's right. That's the one that we're talking about.
Really the only one left.
That would change the composition of the board.
Yep.
And then that board would then make recommendations to the legislature.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, Austin. This is just true.
There's another part to that bill, though.
Political will part. There is nothing about those recommendations from PERS that the legislature has to follow. The legislature right now could change the benefits of retirees if it wanted to, if it was a true priority. They are afraid of the political blowback of that. So they want a board that they can select who can make recommendations that they can then rely on when they make changes. But let's be clear about the legislature's role here. The only entity in the state government that can change that system is the legislature. So when they say we need a new board,
Brandon, I don't think that's true.
They're the only ones that can change benefits.
But hold on, benefits. You're talking about the employee side. Now, the employer contribution side can be changed, I believe.
That's right. That's
by the PERS board.
And that is the thing with the graduated 5% increase. Is that is a point of contention right now.
2% for this. That would begin this year. 2% for the second year, and then 1% on the third year. I believe the House bill, yes, it did change the makeup of the board. 10-member board, 8 of the members are elected as of right now. Then you have head of Department of Revenue, and then you've got state treasurer, who are the 9th and 10th board members. I believe the House bill also stopped. And I don't know how they would do this. I have to go back and look at it. But there was language in there about freezing the 2% increase, employer increase this year. I think that was in there. Now, I don't think the legislature has the authority to do that right now. I assume that the law would have to be changed.
It's set to occur, so they would have to do something to stop it.
They would have to do something to stop that. And I believe that was in I'm not sure if it was the Speaker's bill, but the House's bill to address that specific issue. Because you're right, if we go back on PERS, listen, you either believe, hey, everything's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. And there's this argument that, hey, everything's ultimately going to be fine. We've got all these baby boomers who are retiring, and I don't want to be morbid, but once, unfortunately, they're out of the system, which means they have died. I want them to all live a whole long time, though. But once you get over that sort of hill in the 2045 to 50 range, that's a long time from now. You and I are going to be old. There's this thought, once you get past that, hey, everything will be okay. There's also a thought of, listen, we either have to change this by changing the employment, the retirees' benefits, how much money they get, or we have to change this by the employer contribution rate has to be changed, or the legislature puts cash in to infuse the system. Those are sort of, and I think smart people who care about Mississippi, who care about the retirees, can all agree these are the options that are on the table. And you can have a debate about what's the best one. I think that is what's going on at the Capitol. I'm using my hands a lot. That's what's going on at the Capitol right now. You've got people who are smart, who care about these retirees, who care about state employees right now who are not retirees, and are going, these are the options. Let's figure out what should we do. That may not happen this year, but I think it's a this year, next year kind of thing. They got to do something, unless they just believe, oh, no, I'll be fine. You just got to get over that 2006.
I mean,
Sorry
I'll
to be
say this real
long-winded.
quick. I mean, as we hear that this idea that something has to be done, but on earlier editions of this, you've said you've gone and looked a little bit deeper at the numbers, and to some way, I think may have kind of made the argument that this particular reaction might be an overreaction.
It unquestionably is. There's more nuance to it than what Austin just said. It's not we must act or we don't do anything. No, the truth is they're going to have to do some tweaks. They're going to have to pay attention to this. But whenever the Senate had their big, committee meeting that we all watched, what they were talking about, they kept using the word liabilities, by the way, too. I wish sometimes they would just talk like human beings talk. I'm sure some of the senators do, too, because they probably didn't know what was going on. But when we use the word liabilities, what we're referring to is what the state ultimately owes retirees in terms of their retirement. Well, when we calculate total retirement, that number they keep throwing around over there that all the senators that are telling us how dire this is, that total number they're throwing out is the amount of retirement that PERS would have to spend if everyone retired today. That means somebody started their job right now. Their retirement clock starts running. So that's why that number is a little bit of a fiction. And if you use that to say we must act, it's like, well, do you? Because everybody's not retiring tomorrow. Now, do we have to, over the course of time, make sure that we cover some of those moves that have been made that might not have been accounted for? I think that's a different conversation, and I think that's a little bit where we got off track. But I think, like I said before, members that want to poke that bear, they need to make sure they're being very communicative with the constituencies that care deeply about that issue, or we're going to have the same result because those folks are paying attention.
I don't think you're saying do nothing.
I think I'm saying if you're going to do something, there's a way to do it that involves the retirement community, that involves these different constituency groups that comprise the current board, rather than just coming out and saying, we're changing your board and good luck with the results. I think that's what it kind of felt like. And look, I feel like in a lot of these issues we've mentioned, it feels like stuff gets sprung on people over there. It's like, don't you think the board could have been talked to about it before we got into January? You felt like that was too hard?
But Brandon,
you send them a Thanksgiving card or something to
Brandon,
say.
I have watched meetings from the past summer where I don't know what his title is. The executive director of PERS was talking to the joint legislative budget committee. They're having those conversations. Does that mean they're talking with individual board members? I don't know, but I know they're talking with the guy who is running PERS. I think you would agree with this, and we got to quit talking about PERS. I know you want to pull the plug. That
people are retiring during this conversation.
Yes, that's a better way to say it than what I mentioned earlier. That folks who care, and these are legislators, these are leadership, these are staff members, both sides of the aisle, who care about the folks who are in the system, realize, hey, we need to continue having a debate, and we probably need to do something, and we can agree to that. We certainly can agree. You can't just do nothing.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting that it took such an amount of oxygen out of the room. And, there's some of these other issues that we've talked about, like the ballot initiative.
But can I push back just a second? You're not surprised it took so much oxygen out of the room. Think about how many people are in this system right now who are real voters, who are calling, texting, emailing legislators to go, saying whatever they're saying about this. I'm not shocked at all it's taken so much oxygen out of the room, because this is an issue that's been building and building and building for years and years. And there's so many people who are personally involved with it. Shocks me none that it is the number one issue.
Well, let me contrast.
And to the point before you go, and let's just remind these state employees. I mean, it's one of the few maybe bipartisan groups that legislators really have to really consider, right? I mean, like
Sure.
you have, I mean, it's not just the Republican caucus getting these calls, and it's not just the Democratic caucus getting these calls. I mean, all lawmakers are getting calls about PERS.
It's
They're
not
getting
a
calls from
partisan
their,
issue.
They're getting
Yeah,
calls from their
exactly.
retired school
Yeah.
teacher. They're getting tired from their old science teacher and baseball coach.
They're probably getting calls from their mother, their father, their aunt,
That's
their
right.
uncle.
Yeah.
A lot of people in Mississippi work for the state.
Absolutely.
So I was going to say, though, Austin, the reason that I think it's interesting in terms of the attention that it's gotten is because no one has missed their retirement check in Mississippi. So whenever we talk about
a good point.
wow, man, this house is on fire, I'm like, well, no, everybody's getting paid. But you know where they haven't gotten their check is hospitals that are closing, people who can't get a doctor, people who can't get a nurse. And so, yeah, I think they should have been spending more time on Medicaid expansion. Or how about the ballot initiative? For years and years, we've been able to bring things that were popular with the state, the legislature either didn't want to act on or had problems with, and you could submit a bill and get a ton of signatures on it and then put that thing on the ballot. And ever since the Supreme Court took that away, we can't seem to agree. So I would say these things that are like already crises that like you can't do something about, yeah, that's a little bit bigger than something that you tell me 2045. And also just kind of laugh when that bunch is like, we're just real concerned about these retirees in 2045. Really? Because we got hospitals closing every 30 minutes and we're not seeming to be too up in arms about that.
All right, so I mean, to the point of the ballot initiative, because I do want to bring this back to how we started this whole thing, and that's some of the things that have died. Ballot initiative is part of that. You know, it seems like every session since the Supreme Court shut it down in 2021, the conversation started, and the conversation's kind of just whimpered down. We've seen, like I said, early voting, a bill for early voting, no excuse, early voting. Go to your circuit clerk, vote like election day. That's done. Felony suffrage, you know, giving people convicted of certain felonies who have served their time, paid their fines, you know, giving them their suffrage back, because right now that is a massive lift for anyone to get their suffrage back. But anyway, these things die, and there's a commonality between these things about, you know, whether it's the ballot initiative, suffrage, early voting. I mean, that these are issues that people care about, fundamental, and it's kind of the fundamental element of democracy, right? Their voice, their ability to express themselves. What does it say about this body, both chambers, that these things can't get off the ground and can't make it to conference?
Can I go first on this?
Sure.
I disagree with your setup there. I understand the point that you're making, but I don't think all these are apples to apples. Let me give you a couple examples, please.
Well, I don't necessarily think they're apples to apples, but there's a commonality there.
I understand that the average citizen cares about these issues. I understand your point there, but they are all different inside that building, and ultimately that's where it matters, is inside that building. The common voter, the average voter, can have a huge influence on what happens inside that building. There's no question. We've all seen that on lots of big issues, both right, left, center. The ballot initiative died. The ballot initiative passed with an overwhelming majority in the House. Okay? Bipartisan, had veto proof, nearly 100 votes. The ballot initiative passed in the Senate 26-21. But ultimately, there wasn't the will to push it at the very end of the Senate. That issue, I think, could pop back up before the session ends. House wants to do it bad. The Senate leadership has not ultimately, I think, made a final decision on that. It's an issue that could come back. But it's different, I feel, than early voting. I think the early voting was a very genuine answer by Noah Sanford, who was the chairman, I think, of elections in the House. I read his quote yesterday. I talked to some other people. I really believe that he's not against early voting. He just has some questions about it. Brand new elections commission, brand new elections committee chairman, and he had some circuit clerks who's like, hey, before you go do this, we have some real questions. Can we take the summer and then come back and address this? I'm not saying there's no will to do that on the House and the Senate. I think so there's some differences on that.
All right.
In some ways, you sound like the press person for the Mississippi legislative process. You're running some interference. Look, I was in 2010. I was part of a select committee on early voting that was led by Delbert Hosemann, then Secretary of State. We went across the state and took testimony from every congressional district and talked to circuit clerks, and the overwhelming evidence, and I'm sure this testimony is still out there somewhere, the overwhelming evidence was that people wanted early voting in the state of Mississippi. If you look across the country, most states have some version of this. Noah's a relatively new member. I don't doubt that he's sincere in what he said, but this is, when you look at this from the outside, Austin, and you look at it from a results-oriented standpoint, you do sometimes look at these folks and go, you got to be kidding me. Early voting's been around for decades, and we are somehow needing, you thinking that June, the Simpson County Circuit Clerk's going to uncrack the code on early voting in a way that nobody else can? I mean, it's...
But the reality is, if we don't pass early voting in 2024, the world's not coming to an end in Mississippi. When do we actually have another election in Mississippi? 2026. I know in 2025 we have municipal elections in 2025, but my gosh.
Yeah, but I mean, voting's a big deal.
I know,
and access to the ballot's a big deal.
Of course it is. Look, let's be honest with you. We have early voting right now. It's called absentee ballot.
But you have to have an excuse.
I know.
And you got to get it.
And
you got to get it notarized
circuit
twice.
clerks are sitting there staring at you, going, "Okay, I need to see where you're going to be." Come on.
Well, I've tried cases where
we essentially. I'm like, I want to hear the rest of that story. But we essentially.
I want to go ahead and point, when you bring that up, I'm going to point to something Senator England said in this room when he talked about why he wanted early voting and why it's different than no excuse absentee voting, and that's the election count. Like, those absentee votes are treated like mail-in ballots. They sit there and they're uncounted. And to be fair, there's a party that sits there and has been sitting there since 2020 saying that that's a problem. All these late counts are a problem. That they create doubt and insecurity in the elections. So it seems like a pretty reasonable solution.
Well,
to that.
We got to mention him too. I mean, I do give him credit for that, Austin, for trying to tackle this issue, and it does have broad bipartisan support. And I guess it's okay. I'm talking about early voting.
Okay.
I think it's okay if you tell me, okay, they were sincere in their desire to study this. But I think it's also fair to say that's absurd. Okay, but we feel like y'all need to get it together. And the other commonality, though, is these are all popular issues. Like, I think everything Michael just mentioned, whether it be restoration of your rights after you've served your time, or putting something on the ballot, that the legislature won't move on so that you can have citizens vote on it, giving people access to the polls before just 7 to 7 on Election Day. All of those things are pretty broadly popular ideas, which I think is another thing that kind of leaves you looking askance at the process. It's like, guys and women, these are all issues that, seem to matter to people that we can't seem to get consensus on.
Yeah, I think it was very genuine what Noah said. I honestly believe there are circuit clerks, they ain't thinking about early voting. They're not thinking about that until the very last minute. And when the legislative session has happened and somebody in their association or their fellow clerk from the one county over is calling, going, how y'all going to handle this? How are we going to handle having a staff and make sure, where are we going to come up with that money? Because our office has to be open for whatever the bill said, 10 days, 15 days. And let's also say, this is, right now I think we have absentee ballot. Is it 45 days before an election or 30 days? Whichever it is, this is going to be a less number of days for people to do this.
Yeah, I mean, other states have figured it out. Circuit clerks are some of the best paid public servants in all the country.
They are.
In all the state.
Certainly in their county.
They manage to figure out how to make ends meet on other things they're asked to do. I want us to be respectful of public servants, but I also don't want public servants to make an excuse for why they can't do what other people in their position can do in all states across the country.
5 seconds. I'm not sitting here arguing for or against this. I just genuinely believe what Noah Sanford said and what the feedback from these clerks. And I think
we're not here to impugn the character of Noah Sanford today.
I think that this is an issue that ultimately will pass at some point in time. Not going to be this session, but
it was encouraging. Look, if just to step back, Michael, it's encouraging that it made it
This
as
far?
far as it did. I mean, because it is an important issue. It's been something that many of us have thought, man, we should be doing this for years now. Hats off to Jeremy England. Hats off to other members who got it to the point that it got to.
All right. One bit of a surprise when it comes to for y'all, because I haven't brought this up yet, but as far as bills that died, I was watching the Senate Finance Committee this week. There was a bill that would allow some direct to consumer purchase of wine from both in-state and out-of-state vendors. The resistance came from representatives that were worried how that would affect the package store, liquor store, owners, and it struck a chord with me thinking back to last session when we kind of had the same debate over EV sales, right? EV sales direct to consumer. No, the legislature put in code that said that those, like all combustible engine vehicles, had to go through a dealer. And so also, I'm going to put this to you first because I just found this very interesting. That we have a super majority in both chambers, and that means we have large majorities on all these committees. And it seems that the party of the free market does some things that really pick winners and losers and acts as protectionist in some way. Now you may take objection to that, but I'm just confused. Like how can we find congruency in these things?
Yeah, I have not talked to Senator Harkins about that bill. Not involved with that bill whatsoever, but certainly very familiar with it. It's called the direct ship bill. Mm-hmm. So if you go to California and you want to order wine, you ought to do a winery tour in California, and you're like, "Ooh, I really like this wine. Hey, can I order it?" And you ship it to my house in Madison or Brandon or Bolton or wherever. Now, I can't do that.
No, you can't join a Wine of the Month club either.
It's illegal to do these things. You've got to go to your liquor store. My grandfather owned a liquor store in Yazoo City, so I feel for the liquor store owners, but I do feel like that is picking winners and losers. I mean, we are in a new economy in America today, even in Mississippi today, where, how many Amazon packages show up on our door on a weekly basis? If it's at my house, my wife orders from Amazon a lot. Yeah. So why can't we do that with EVs or with wine? I totally get the argument. But listen, things always come back to politics.
Yeah. Yep.
And these folks who've owned these liquor stores for decades, they're majorly involved in
and sometimes they're generational businesses.
There's no question it is. And they have a lot of influence. And I'm sure they have a compelling argument to why this shouldn't be allowed. I don't know what that argument is because I haven't had those conversations. Right. I'm not saying that in a dismissive way, but they have fought this very successfully, at least for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
And it ain't going away. It's going to just keep coming back.
I'm a really spiritual person. I get the impression y'all two might be heathens. I don't know, but I remember when these debates used to come up,
Catholic,
and they would fight over, the efficacy of drinking at all, and staying away from alcohol. And this year we fought over gambling.
Yep.
We fought over drinking.
Medical marijuana.
Those marijuana. I mean, blow your mind. That legislature used to be a place where despite however much people might drink when they weren't behind the microphone, they sure gave lip service to staying dry. So that's an interesting phenomenon that's not as old as people might think. You don't have to go back very far to where some of the conversations we're having now would have been anathema over there at that place. But then to the point that Austin made, this is worth noting, I think, for people, because sometimes we throw around words in politics like big government or small government, or I want little government. You ever notice that those words are used selectively, and whenever we want government to quash a certain type of business in favor of another business, we don't call that big government. We call that protectionism or protecting local. That's big government. That is your government telling the consumer who they can and cannot buy from. And I think we had a chance to talk about this last week. I think government ought to work in favor of people and over consumers, over picking favorites in the industry, which I think is very much like what you just said, Austin. And, I don't know all the ins and outs of this, but in Mississippi, and I guess in a lot of state legislatures across our country, you have fights like this, and you kind of sit back and you wonder who's who's pulling the levers here? Who is it that's saying no to this? But I assume that we have not seen the last of this issue.
Yeah, but to make a brief parallel to PERS with this issue, there are a lot of people who care about the PERS issue because they're retirees, they're state employees. Picking up that phone, sending a text, sending an
telling
email.
your buddies to chill out and not pass anything.
Yeah, for whatever they care about on PERS. Same people care about this issue. Excuse me, not the same, but there's a much smaller group who passionately.
Are you saying our retirees drink a lot of wine?
They may because they're retired. Who passionately care about this issue. So it's the same thing. I mean, the individual, the power of the individual really matters in that building. It does.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there for this week. This has been At Issue on MPB Think Radio, a weekly discussion about the 2024 Mississippi legislative session. If you can't catch us live each Friday at 6:30, At Issue can be streamed on demand on the MPB Public Media app, or you can subscribe to the At Issue podcast. Each week's podcast includes an extended version of our weekly interview, as well as an extended version of our roundtable discussion. And if you'd like to see what we all look like, the full interview and roundtable are available on YouTube. Just search Mississippi Public Broadcasting At Issue. I'm Michael Gidry for all of us at MPB. Thanks for listening.